What's up, Wizards? It's Papa D from Mtg, aka The Big Chill. I got Ziggy with me, and today I'm in kind of an awkward position. Not gonna lie, because the spread love and be kind guy has to talk about how to be hateful. I wonder if YouTube's algorithm is just gonna pop me for that, so make sure you like and subscribe, because I don't know if this one's gonna be monetized or not, just because of that one sentence. But either way, I'm actually not as bummed out as I would normally be by this proposition, because I get to finally talk about a card that I love with all my heart. Ironically, right, Theros has been out for the better part of a year now, like what, 9 months, and I still haven't gotten to do a deck tech on Hateful Eidolon, which is actually one of my favorite cards in that whole set. This is Ziggy's belly, by the way. He's the only kitty in the world that doesn't mind belly rubs. See, he doesn't care at all. And also, see, I can't be hateful for like a whole video. I had the idea that I was going to do like a shtick, a gimmick, where I'm like a sardonic jerk the entire time. Or even bring back Kev. Some of you probably have no idea what that means, but those of you who do might be excited by that prospect. I can't hold that character for 20 minutes. I apologize that there's no fun, shtick in this video, but I can't commit to the character. But I am excited that I get to talk about this card again, finally, because this isn't like the usual deck techs that are 2 or 3 weeks in the making. This deck tech is like 9 months in the making. And I have gotten to try some stuff with this card on camera. I think we've done Black, White, All That Glitters with Hateful Eidolon. It was a really, really fun deck at the time, but I've never actually sat down for the deck tech experience of trying to figure out like the most optimal competitive build for best of 3 for the Hateful Eidolon deck. So this was quite the journey. And as part of that journey, I've tried out 4 completely conceptually different Hateful Eidolon builds. And I think I've finally landed on one that I'm happy presenting to you that might have some controversial choices in the eyes of some people, but they're choices that I stand by because this is the version of the deck that I've had the most success with. So go ahead, pop the tab on a cold beverage, maybe get a little sandwich together, whatever you want to do. Come chill on the couch. Let's talk about Hateful Eidolon. The reason I've been so excited about this thing the whole time it's been in Standard is because in my mind, at least, it's like the black Edgewall Innkeeper. Just a 1-mana creature that requires that you play a lot of a certain card type, and it pays you in cards for doing so. And it's the rare black card draw engine that doesn't require you to lose life in order to draw your cards. In fact, it has lifelink. It actually pays you back in life if you can slap something big on it. Also, a lot like Innkeeper, if you can get set up with multiples in the early game, it can be near broken the amount of cards you can draw off of this. But unlike Innkeeper, some important distinctions, this can actually block 1-power things without dying. But an even more important distinction from Innkeeper is that in this deck, we've got ways to guarantee playing at least 1 enchantment every single turn, which even the Adventures decks can't guarantee. They can virtually guarantee it with an Innkeeper in play, but not quite. Eventually they're going to draw a brick or a land or whatever, and then they can't keep getting card advantage off of Innkeeper until they draw another adventure creature. As far as we go, we've got ways to play our enchantments out of the graveyard, thus effectively guaranteeing that we get card draw off of Eidolon every turn, which you can't say about Innkeeper, so Eidolon better than Innkeeper? I'm here to say it. But a Hateful Eidolon deck isn't necessarily so much about the Eidolon, it's more about the enchantments that you play around it. So before we look at any of the other creatures or spells in the deck, let's look at our 14-card enchantment suit, because I think that's one of the most important parts of the deck. And we got to start with some removal enchantments, because in case you haven't noticed this, in case somehow you haven't seen this yet, the way Hateful Eidolon is written, if you put an aura on one of your opponent's creatures that ends up killing that creature, you draw cards. It's not just when stuff you control dies. I think most of us know that, but in case you haven't peeped it yet, for the 5 of you that didn't know that, that's actually one of the coolest things about the cards. You have to run removal enchantments in your deck. The good news is we got plenty of them in Standard right now. We're going to run 3 copies of Deadweight, 4 copies of Mire's Grasp, and 2 copies of Mogus's Favor. Now, the 3rd copy of Deadweight, and you could argue the 2nd copy of Mogus's Favor, are kind of flexible slots, especially within the best of 3 environment. There are going to be control decks you come up against which these cards are effectively dead. That doesn't do a whole lot for you, but you can do some sideboarding to alleviate that. I have tended to come up against a lot more creature-based decks lately, whether they're aggro or mid-range decks that just play creatures in the early game. And against all of these decks, these are good cards. Plus, we were trying to hit a certain number of enchantments in the deck. I wasn't really comfortable with anything under 14, so we had to boost that by adding copies of Weight and Mogus's Favor. But again, it turns out these are good cards in the format right now. Even Mogus's Favor if you use it as removal. Now, there are 14 creatures in the deck we can put a Favor on and boost them without killing them, so that's important. And the one creature that we're playing that Mogus's Favor does kill, you might actually want to be putting in your graveyard. More on that later, but in any case, Mogus's Favor can take out Lotus Cobras, Fervent Champions, Seasoned Hallowblades, which is very important. All of these removal spells can take out a Hallowed Blade without it being able to go indestructible. So keep that in mind. That's an important business to be in right now. And Edgewall Innkeepers, what else have I not mentioned? Skyclave Shade, I guess. Like, there's a ton of X1s in this format right now. A Dry Thieves Guild Enforcer. You could keep going. There are tons of creatures that Amogus' Favor can kill in the early or even late game right now. So some of the times you'll use it like a removal spell, and then some of the times you'll put it on a Hateful Eidolon, start swinging for 3 lifelink. There's nothing wrong with that either. But Deadweight, and especially Mire's Grasp, can take out a ton of really important creatures in the environment right now. Mire's Grasp can kill both Rankle and Nighthawk Scavenger and Soaring Thought Thief. So just all of the most important creatures in Rogues, minus Zera's Sand, you could argue. This will take out, and a bunch of other important creatures people are playing right now. Now there are X4s that we do have to worry about that, you know, one single removal spell of ours can't take out. You know, things like Gem Razor, Questing Beast, so forth and so on. But usually these removal spells can bring them down to a manageable level so that we can block them from there. Now the other enchantments that we're playing in the deck are exclusively auras that boost our creature's PT. We got 2 copies of Infernal Scarring and 3 copies of Demonic Embrace. Now, let me talk about Scarring first, because I didn't think that this card was going to make it into the main deck. But again, 2 things. First of all, we're looking to hit a certain enchantment count. So I wanted to boost the number of enchantments. If that means playing Infernal Scarring, so be it. But second of all, the card performed better than I thought that it would. It didn't overperform, but it did exceed some of my expectations. So I wasn't very excited about trying this card out. But there's some really cool stuff you can do with it. If you put it on one of your opponent's creatures while you have a Hateful Eidolon out, and you kill that creature with, say, a Deadweight or a Mire's Grasp, you'll end up drawing 3 cards off of that interaction, which is really sweet. But of course, you can put it on a Hateful Eidolon, and then when the Hateful Eidolon dies, you'll draw a couple of cards. That's, you know, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Scarring. Plus, it does boost the creature's PT, so if you put it on a flyer, you can start getting in for some real damage quickly. And even if you just put it on a Hateful Eidolon, again, you've got a 3-power lifelinker. That's like Amogus' Favor. So sometimes it's not actually as bad as it looks, but Infernal Scarring was definitely the weakest card in the deck. That said, it exceeded my expectations without particularly overperforming. I'm not too unhappy with playing the card. Now, Demonic Embrace, a more interesting entry and maybe one of the more controversial ones, honestly, because this means we can't play Lurrus of the Dream Den as our companion, but I'm completely fine with that because it turns out that I'll stake it. I'll stake my claim right here. Demonic Embrace is easily one of the most important cards in this deck and in this environment for that matter. We've got multiple mill decks, not just rogues, but other mill decks as well, control decks that mill you in the mix. So there are a lot of times where Demonic Embrace is just kind of a free draw when your opponent mills you, right? Having a card in your graveyard that can come out of your graveyard, a very important thing to have in this environment. Plus, you put it on a Hateful Eidolon, you got like a 4-power flying lifelinker. That feels so pretty good. Feels really good, actually. If there's one thing this deck needs, it's closing powers. So I would include Demonic Embrace in any build of Hateful Eidolon that I make from now on. I don't think that it's so important to have Lurrus as your companion that you just skip out on playing this card. But, speak of the devil, and he appears, we're playing 3 copies of Lurrus of the Dream Den in the main deck here, which I do think is the better, I really think it's the better call. I really want to play Demonic Embrace. And a couple of other cards that help you finish the game. And again, this deck does not have a whole lot of closing power under the normal Lurrus as companion builds. So I just wanted more oomph, more, way to close the game. Once we've taken advantage of, killing a guy, drawing a couple cards in the early game, you got to close the game fast after you take that initial advantage. And I feel like the Lurrus as companion builds just don't do that very well, but remember, you can still play Lurrus in the main deck and it's fine. Turns out, Lurrus in the main deck is kind of nice, because if they kill your Lurrus, you just draw another Lurrus. The problem is that you have to draw Lurrus in the first place, which can be kind of a headache sometimes if you're trying to replay some of your enchantments out of the graveyard or whatever. But, your opponent exiling your Lurrus doesn't mean that that plan is done with forever. You can draw another Lurrus with a Hateful Eidolon or a Castle Locthwain or whatever. I'm much more comfortable playing Lurrus in the main deck as a 3 or even a 4 of. I've seriously considered that, because I just think it's the better game plan, considering you get to play some cards the deck really, really needs, and you get extra copies of Lurrus, which is something you don't usually have. I'm also playing 4 copies of Archfiend's Vessel in the deck. Now, just as French fries, or in most foods in general, are a vessel for sauce, this is a vessel for the sauce as well, because is that a good enough joke? There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. Obviously, you can play Lurrus of the Dream Den, play Archfiend's Vessel out of your yard. Look at that, you got yourself 5/5 Demon Boy. Which also, by the way, wears Demonic Embrace well. Yeah, you're not gifting it flying because it already had flying, but at least you're swinging in for 8, and that'll just close a lot of games, so you don't care. Right, so just keep in mind that you can slap that Embrace on the demon, but you can slap it on Archfiend's Vessel and start swinging for 4/2 in the air. Whatever you want to do, champ. It's up to you. But this has lifelink too, so it also just in its base state wears a Demonic Embrace pretty nicely. Looks good on the old chap. But you know, once it dies, it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi. You know, you strike it down, it'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Not only can Lurrus get this out of the graveyard, but we're playing 5 billion other cards. I think there's like 7 other cards in the deck, besides just Lurrus, that can get Archfiend's Vessel out of your yard and turn it into a big old demon, man. So there's just so many ways to abuse the card in the deck, plus also Demonic Embrace. But if we're going to be playing stuff out of our yard, what would be really nice is if that stuff did a thing when it entered the battlefield. So far we haven't seen a whole lot of that. Outside of, I guess you could make an argument for the auras that we're playing, but either way, we're playing 4 copies of Acquisitions Expert, another card, kind of like Infernal Scarring, that I'm a little surprised I ended up on, but honestly, I really like this card on turn 2, especially after an Archfiend's Vessel. You get to see 2 cards, which is checks dictionary dope. It's actually really dope that you can do that on turn 2. You get to see 2 cards and pick the best out of those 2. But there's not really a whole lot going on in terms of party mechanics with this card in the deck. It's just kind of a burglar rat, in a way, on most turn 2s, but once you do get a Lurrus down, then you can play it out of your graveyard and start getting stuff out of your opponent's hand. There's like a bunch of other ways to get it out of the graveyard and make it get more cards out of the opponent's hand, right? We need some sort of a spread of playable cards against all deck types. And honestly, making aggro decks discard cards is pretty decent some of the time. But, you know, a lot of our cards are effective against aggro and dead against control. But this is one of those cards that's really, really quite decent against control, especially if you can get multiple copies of it throughout the game through reanimation or drawing them, whatever. So just a really effective tool against control, and we need those. Turns out we absolutely need those. Plus, again, Demonic Embrace, 4 power flyers, not bad. And this can wear Mogus's favor without dying too, so that can matter some of the time. But anyway, last creature that we're playing in the deck is the 3 copies of Rankle, Master of Pranks. Now, this is yet another reason why I don't want to play Lurrus as my companion. Rankle is just such a powerful duder in the late game that A, wears a Demonic Embrace well. I keep saying that about everything, but it turns out every creature looks good in a Demonic Embrace. But put a Mogus's favor on this and swing for 5. Infernal Scarring, it swings for 5. When it does die, you draw a card. So you can sacrifice it if you have to, and you still draw a card. That's kind of nice with Infernal Scarring. But another cool trick is that if you have a Lurrus of the Dream Den out, you can sacrifice Hateful Eidolon or Acquisitions Expert even, which is a really nice trick. And then just play it out of your graveyard in your second main phase. So, like especially with Acquisitions Expert, your opponent sacrificed the creature, but you get to replay your creature and they have to discard a card. That's a really brutal chain of events right there. So, plus, Rankle has haste. It's good closing power for the deck, which I've already mentioned we need. So, again, I just think it's a mistake to play Lurrus as your companion when you could be playing cards like this. Now, as far as other spells in the deck, we're playing just 1 copy of Call of the Death Dweller. Now, we're already playing Lurrus of the Dream Den, right, in the main deck. Plus, 4 copies of Agadeem's Awakening, too, so I should probably tell you that. We just don't need all the Call of the Death Dwellers in the world, but it's still a really effective card. You get Hateful Eidolons and Acquisitions Experts, and, you know, it gets you a 5/5 Demon off of Archfiend's Vessel, get your Lurruses back. There's a lot of cool things about Call of the Death Dweller, so I wanted to at least run 1 copy of this, but I felt like Agadeem's Awakening was definitely the better card, all things considered. For 7 mana, this gets a Rankle and everything else on down out of your graveyard. I still haven't pulled it off yet, but there is a dream line where you get a Rankle and you get, you get a Rankle and a Lurrus and a 2-drop creature like Acquisitions Expert, and you get an Archfiend's Vessel out of your yard all at the same time for 7 mana. I haven't hit that line yet, but it's technically possible, right? But there's still plenty of stuff that Agadeem's Awakening does for you, even if you don't hit the magical line, right? You're just getting a Lurrus out of your yard with this, plus 2 other creatures is usually pretty bomb, but just casting it for 5 and getting like an Expert and an Archfiend's Vessel out of your yard is pretty effective. Just almost anything you can do with an Agadeem's Awakening is good in this deck, even if you're just paying 4 mana. Right, X equals 1 to get a Vessel out of your graveyard, and you paid 4 mana for a 5/5 flyer, which is above curve, so you did okay for yourself, right? So, like, just about every cost at which you can cast an Awakening in this deck does something really, really silly for you. Now, in the same vein as the last couple of cards, but not really a reanimation piece per se, still, it kind of is. We're playing 2 copies of Malakir Rebirth in the deck. Now, there's a really cool trick with Archfiend's Vessel on this one. You can just you just get a 5/5 on turn 2, right? You play your Archfiend's Vessel on turn 1, block on turn 2, Malakir Rebirth, whoops, 5/5. It's kind of disgusting. Now, you'll see a lot of decks play like Village Rites, so they can do that trick on turn 2 without having to block, but I don't want to like Village Rites more than I like it. Some people might ask why Village Rites isn't in the deck. I didn't like it, that's why. I feel like it's much better in the decks where Lurrus is your companion, but either way, you can still get a 5/5 demon relatively easy on turn 2 with a Malakir Rebirth, but this is good with Hateful Eidolons. It's good with Lurrus of the Dream Den, obviously a creature that you want to keep out. It's good with Rankle. It's good alongside Rankle because you can sacrifice something. Malakir Rebirth, whoops. So there's a lot of really cool stuff this card does, and also it is also a land, which you will play it as well, so keep that in mind. But we're playing one more NDFC in the deck before we get to the actual lands, and that's Hagramali. Just a 2 of this card. Now, in lieu of main deck Bloodchief's Thirst and Heartless Axe and stuff like that, I'm just playing 2 Mauling. But this is a very important card because, like I said earlier, there's going to be X4s and X5s and even bigger creatures, Beanstalk Giants and stuff, that your enchantment removal just can never hope to actually take down. So you need a thing that just says destroy target creature. Not target creature with no counters on it, target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, target creature with toughness 3 or less, sorcery speed. No, you don't. None of that. You need an instant speed card that kills a thing. So use your Hagramalings wisely and try to only use them on things that you can't kill with your other removal spells. But it is very important to play a card like this in the main deck. That leaves us with 19 slots for lands, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you add 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to that, so we're actually running 27 lands in the deck, but, you know, pretty cut and dried here. You run the 4 castle locked lands so you can draw extra cards. That's why you do that. You also run 15 swamps because you need black sources. Seriously, try not running swamps to see where that gets you. But anyway, let's look at the sideboard right here, starting with a couple of copies of Cling to Dust, which a lot of decks are starting to run in the main as a one-of. But hey, I saw a Rogues finish the other day. I think it was in an Owl City Weekly tournament. That ran 3 copies of Cling to Dust in the main deck. It's a really popular card, even after Euro's out of the format, because it takes care of all kinds of things, whether your opponent's playing Lurrus of the Dream Den, you're in the, you're in the mirror match of some kind, or your opponent's playing Skyclave Shade or Croxa. There's all kinds of reasons why you might want to remove cards from your opponent's graveyard, so Cling is still a very important card to have access to. As far as removal, we're running 3 copies of Bloodchief's Thirst, 2 Feed the Swarm, and a Heartless Act. Now, here's the thing, I'm actually a little reticent to run so many cards that aren't good against control in this sideboard, but at the same time, Bloodchief's Thirst can take out Planeswalkers, Heartless Act can take out creatures that our removal can't take out, and Feed the Swarm can take out enchantments, which can be important some of the time in this environment. So I don't know that I'd take any of these cards out of the board. We need each and every one of them for different pinpoint reasons, but all in all, we still do need some form of removal to take out opponent stuff that our other removal can't deal with. And in a mid-range format, people are playing plenty of stuff that we can't deal with. Trust me, your opponent plays Yorion, it's going to be nice to have a copy of Heartless Act in your deck. But anyway, when we are dealing with control decks, we're going to run 3 copies of Agonizing Remorse and 4 copies of Skyclave Shade, which you can play out of your graveyard with Lurrus if you want to, if you don't have a land drop for the turn. But obviously, when you do have your land drops, this annoys the crap out of control decks and is really good in the late game. Skyclave Shade is an amazing card against decks that take it a little bit slow and rely heavily on 1-for-1 removal, and there's kind of a shocking amount of those. So just side in all 4 Skyclave Shades when you run across more control-oriented decks. As far as Agonizing Remorse, it's pretty self-evident why this card is in the deck. Exiling is very important in this format, still to this day, which is why I'm playing Remorse over a card like, say, Duress. I'm more than happy to pay an extra mana. I know it's twice as much as Duress, but I'm more than happy to pay 2 mana to make sure I never have to deal with the stinking thing I'm exiling ever again. Now, there were some more possibilities for this deck. Like I said, I tried out a whole lot of different stuff when I was putting this thing together. First of all, there's the Ephemia, Mire Triton, Timurit Calls deck, that whole thing. And I do think Ephemia is a nice card right now, but there are plenty of ways to take out Ephemia that people are playing. Not only Bloodchief's Thirst, but also Spikefield Hazard, Heartless Act. There's just so many ways to take out Ephemia, and this is a creature that our entire deck is more or less built around if we're going to play the Ephemia build, and I just thought it was a little bit soft for that. So I didn't end up on that. Plus, I feel like in a format where we have rogues and a bunch of mills decks and stuff. I don't want to do their job for them with a card like Mire Triton or Timuret Call, so I didn't play those. All That Glitters is something I've already mentioned that you could do, but I wanted to keep this deck mono black, sometimes for budget reasons, but also just because I wanted it to be a really focused deck, and I didn't much care for the mana in what is effectively a 2-color aggro deck if you're building a Hateful Eidolon deck. There's also Fiend Artisan, which I didn't play, but you absolutely could, and I don't have a great reason for not playing it, honestly. It's just that I wanted a certain number of creatures and a certain number of enchantments, and Fiend Artisan just didn't necessarily fit into the final build. Now here are your power rankings. Final score of 66 for this deck. One of the lower scores this season for any deck that we've covered, but still a relatively high score for a deck that's not going to cost you all the money in the world. Agadeem's Awakening and Rankle are both relatively expensive cards right now, but all in all, this deck shakes out pretty cheap at the end of the day, and it plays effectively too. It's got good game against the aggro decks in the format like Mono Red and so forth, because we've got plenty of removal, we've got a lot of card draw, we've got a lot of lifelink, and we got a lot of ways to go over them for the kill, like Demonic Embrace or Rankle. So we actually perform pretty admirably against those decks, but even in the main deck before we sideboard, we do pretty well against control, even with so many dead cards, because we have lots of ways to get creatures back from the graveyard. Lurrus of the Dream Den, Malakir Rebirth can save a creature from removal. You know, we've got Agadeem's Awakening, all that, Call of the Death Dweller. So just lots and lots of ways to be resilient in the main deck. So we're not so linear as it might appear. We actually have a pretty decent game plan against a relatively wide variety of decks. It's honestly all these mid-range decks people are playing right now. We have the biggest problem against things like Kroxa, Yorion, we do have some issues with, but rogues we're quite good against. Control decks we're quite good against. Mono Red we're really good against. We do have some good matchups. We also have some matchups you kind of have to sacrifice, but that's true of just about every deck in Standard. But this is a really synergistic and, is that a word? Synergetic? It's synergistic. And efficient deck that plays multiple game plans against multiple deck types. It's very resilient, so if you're interested in high stats, where this deck has high stats, try it out, man. I think it's actually a lot more effective than some of these similar decks, and I do think, I won't say this is the best build of Hateful Eidolon, but I've tried out a bunch of builds over a bunch of months, and this is the one that's worked best in any Standard environment for me. Don't take my word for it, play it yourself. If you want to try the deck out, click the first link in the description. That'll take you to TCG Player. You get the deck for super low prices there. And if you want to try it on Arena, it could have fewer rares and mythic wildcards, but it also could have way, way more. So try this thing out if you can. It's pretty cheap in paper, and it's not so tough on Arena. And it actually did a lot of work for me on the ladder, so give this thing a try if you possibly can. And aside from that, let me know how you felt about it down there in the comments section. What's your current build looking like? Do you think it is important to play Demonic Embrace and Rankle? Do you agree with me? Or do you think it's so important to play Lurrus as your companion? How do you fill those other slots that we use for Rankle and Embrace and stuff? I'm really interested in this deck. Like I said, Hateful Eidolon is one of my favorite cards in Standard Magic right now, so if you guys have any ideas, I'm all ears. Let's bump heads. Let's put our heads together, either one of those things, down there in the comments section, and we'll talk it over. Aside from that, just like the video, subscribe if you can, and you haven't done that yet. I think only like 40% of my viewers are subscribed. It's actually, that's relatively high for YouTube. But still, if you haven't subscribed yet, I know you're out there. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications so you get more content. Aside from that, watch me play Magic at twitch.tv/SBMTGDev, and you can follow me on Twitter at the same name. If you want to pick what content we do around here, that's super simple. Link in the description, or just go to patreon.com/SBMTG. Pledge $1 a month, that's all I ask, and I feel like I'm worth it. And then you can vote on what decks you want to see around here and on the Twitch streams. So pretty good value for $1, better than a value thing of French fries. They're tiny, and I'm huge. But anyway, I think that's all I got for this one. Man, I'm excited I got to talk about Hateful Eidolon, and I think I'm going to be playing this one on stream relatively soon. So drop by if you're interested. Aside from that, like I said, just let me know how you felt about it, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck techs. I come correct like a porn star, slicing up all these other suckers with my sword, Mars.